I remember a number of years ago, an individual called me because they had committed murder and gotten away with the murder, and they had not been able to sleep a full night in the years since they had done the murder and not been discovered. And I talked with them on the phone, and I listened to the full confession. And I said to the person, you still won't be able to sleep, even though you've told me. I said, you got to do what you know is right. You've got to do what you know is right. And so I said, don't think that you can have your conscience salved by just telling me to use me as some type of a mental purgative, a catharsis for you, when the only way to really to be purged of this, to where you're not violating your conscience, is that you got to make this right. I said, you got to call the popo. You got to turn yourself in. You do the crime, you do the time. You do the time. You do the time. But see, how can you sleep knowing that you have murdered somebody else's child? And you have gotten away literally with murder. And the individual told me precisely how they did it, detail by detail. But they couldn't sleep, and they had to talk. They had carried this as a heavy burden for a long time and couldn't sleep. And I'm wondering, how have you been able to survive this long? Even though the person felt so much better once they told me about it. I said, you may feel better, but it's not over until you do what's right. Because you cannot violate your own conscience and have peace. Your peace will leave you if you violate your conscience when you do not do the things that you know are right to do. Secondly, you violate your conscience when you do not treat people fairly. When you do not treat people fairly, your conscience is going to bother you. You violate your conscience when you do not treat people fairly. Now, there are some people that can abuse other people, and it just doesn't register to them that what they are doing is mistreating other people. They don't see it that way. Some people, I've looked at some individuals, and I've said to myself, this person is obviously mentally ill to be able to treat people the way that they treat people and go home and sleep all night. Either they're mentally ill, or you are so filled up with demons that you are so deceived in thinking that your behavior is okay and acceptable and that they deserve this. You're so deluded in your own thinking that it does not bother your conscience, but it is not the sign of a healthy mind or healthy emotions. So you violate your conscience when you do not treat people fairly. When you have done to the best of your ability to treat people fairly and to do what you know is right to do, you sleep very well at night. You really do. You really sleep well at night. But Paul talked about it, that men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day, and I think that we ought to make that a goal in our life. And you notice here in verse 3 when he got into a real tiff here with the high priest, and Paul lost his cool here. You notice this? Paul and the high priest Ananias, they get into a tiff, and Paul loses his cool. And notice what Paul said to him. Paul said, will you strike? He said, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. Now I wish I had some modern day expression. That doesn't really cut it with me to actually say it. When you get really upset with somebody and talk about you whitewashed wall. I think we got some stronger words nowadays. And maybe Paul was trying to keep it clean, but I bet I can find one or two of you all that can substitute some stuff, that'll express the real sentiment I believe that Paul was feeling. But Paul is talking to the high priest here. And the issue is that Paul does not recognize that this is the high priest, or else Paul would not have talked to him in that fashion, even though what Paul spoke to him was truth. Paul spoke the truth. But he was a bit perturbed because the high priest had ordered that Paul be struck. And so they hit him, and he's like, what in the world you hit me for? He said, you strike me, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. I'm not going to touch it. I'm just, certain things are just better to just leave right where they are. But you notice in verse 5 here, Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was a high priest, because Paul is a man in authority, but he's also a man under authority. So Paul knows how to respect authority. That's in him. That's why Paul can sleep at night. That's why he has a good conscience. Paul doesn't go around disrespecting folks, being a rebel. By disrespecting authority, Paul understands authority, and Paul is properly submitted to authority. So Paul says, I didn't know, brethren, that he was a high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. So Paul knew the law. Paul was well educated in the law. Paul said, I didn't know that was a high priest. I didn't know. And it was his way of apologizing, saying that had I known, I wouldn't have done that. So he's apologizing for disrespecting the high priest. But then notice the tactic here that Paul uses in verse 6 down through 10 here. But when Paul perceived in verse 6 that one part were Sadducees and the others were Pharisees, he cried out in the council, men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. And you know that a house divided against itself cannot stand. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. And then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes and the Pharisees party arose and protested, saying, we find no evil in this man. But if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. And now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the barracks. So took him back to his cell. Hear what Paul did here. Paul resorted to using the old-fashioned model of divide and conquer. He uses the old-fashioned divide and conquer model, because Paul understood the Pharisees, because he was a Pharisee, and he understood the Sadducees, and he knew the doctrinal differences between the two groups. And so Paul appeals to his own folks, the Pharisees on the council, knowing that it was going to cause something to rise up on the inside of them. And so, because he understood the background of his accusers, he knew exactly what to say in order to divide the Sanhedrin. And the Lord was with Paul. God was with Paul, giving Paul wisdom in responding to the Sanhedrin. God gave him wisdom. God gave Paul wisdom. Sometimes when you don't know what to say, just stop and pray, God, give me wisdom. God, give me wisdom. Give me wisdom. That's some people that will still have that job today. Had they prayed that prayer, Lord, give me wisdom. You can't just get in front of folks with authority, and just speak your mind and like, well, you were right. There's some stuff needed to be said in there, and I said it. But what you going to do next week? Yeah, I know you said it, but you know how hard jobs ought to come about right now? And you went in there and spoke your mind, and you weren't thinking about the other people that are depending on you? You got some bills that's going to keep on coming in every month. And have you ever noticed if you lose your job, the bills look like they come in faster? Have you ever noticed that? They will keep rolling in. Your bills will keep rolling in. And so you have to stop and ask God for wisdom. Ask God for wisdom. You see, for some of the Pharisees, winning their argument against the Sadducees suddenly became more important than condemning Paul. Because now they come and sort of jump on Paul's side. The Pharisees jump on Paul's side. Because Paul knew how to talk their language. He knew how to push their buttons to get him on his side. And he's in a strange position here. Some of them had to be separated, because the contention, the dissension was so strong, and both of them are pulling on Paul, saying, no, this is our boy here. And the other one said, no, give him to us, we need to condemn him to death. And they're just in a tug of war, pulling Paul, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, but two folks with different opinions of him. Same man, but two folks with different opinion. Isn't it amazing how you can be the same person, and some people see you as a wonderful person and other people want you murdered? And he was the same man, but they saw him in different light, and perception for most people is reality. And they wanted him put to death based on their perception of him, but not based on the truth. Perception is not truth. Perception is not truth. It is not truth. And that's why some people are more interested in creating an image or brand than they are walking the truth. And notice verse 11 here. But the following night, the Lord stood by him and said, be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome. Now I want you to notice what happened here. Remembering the prophecy here that Paul's chains and imprisonment in Jerusalem would come in Jerusalem here, this would have been of very little consolation to Paul, just remembering a prophecy when he was going through this. But it had all been prophesied about. But even though it had been prophesied, it still didn't make Paul feel that good, even though it had been prophesied about. So amid this terrible turmoil that arose in Paul's life, his life is on the line, literally. And things were so bad in Paul's life at this point that Jesus had to appear to him to encourage him. Jesus appears to Paul. He appears to Paul and says, Paul, be of good cheer. In other words, cheer up. Be of good courage. Be encouraged, Paul. Be encouraged. He was telling him, you've testified before me in Jerusalem, and you must also bear witness of me in Rome. He says, you're not going to die here. They are not going to kill you here. Isn't that good news? And so I guess Paul was like, well, phew, I felt like I was getting ready to die. And you could tell that Paul was worried here because Jesus had to pay him a visit. He doesn't just pay you a visit just because, you hadn't seen him in a while. Paul could count the times on his hand that Jesus appeared to him. And this is one of those times. It's a dark period in Paul's life. And Jesus had to come and personally give him some encouragement. So Paul needed this visitation desperately to regain the physical and emotional and spiritual fortitude that he would need to go through the rest of this trying experience. He needed this encounter with Jesus. And so what Jesus was doing was not merely encouraging for where he had been. He was here to strengthen him for where he had to go. That not only have you testified for me here in Jerusalem, you got to go and bear witness of me and testify for me in Rome. So the appearance of Jesus was to strengthen him. Remember, Paul was a human being, and human beings get physically tired. We become emotionally drained and spiritually weak. Have you ever just met people that just drain you emotionally? Sometimes just to look at them. Touch a neighbor, say, I know this person. I know them. I know them. There are some people, if you just see them coming, it's like, oh God, give me strength. Have you ever, this is what Paul is dealing with, and he's drained. He's worn out by people that he thought that were for him, and then they tend to be against him and conjuring up lies and all of this kind of stuff, and they just sapped Paul's energy. You know, when you've been trying to do good and then you get persecuted and you have a hard time when you're trying to do good, that's awfully discouraging. It really is terribly discouraging, and Paul needed some encouragement. And so Jesus steps in. He didn't send anybody. Jesus came himself and appeared to him and encouraged Paul. He encouraged him. And he was basically letting him know, this is not the end of the road for you, Paul. I know you feel like it, but this is not the end of the road. You're not going to die here. You got some more work to do. So be of good cheer, my boy, because your work is not finished. And I want you to realize this is not the only time that Jesus appeared to Paul other than his Damascus Road experience. When Paul returned to Jerusalem after his conversion, and when he was in danger again of being captured by the Jews, Jesus appeared to him and warned him to leave. In Acts chapter 22 and verse 18, we see reference to that in Acts 22:18. And then in Corinth, when the Jews were there, they were taking Paul to Gallio's court. Jesus appeared to him in a vision there and told him that he would not be harmed in Acts chapter 18 verse 9 and 10. So that's another time that Jesus appeared to him. May I just remind you here, Jesus appeared to him in Acts 18, he appeared to him in Acts 22, and now he's appearing to him in Acts chapter 23 again. And this is not counting the time that he appeared to him on the Damascus road. This is just serving as a reminder to you that the Lord will come to you in your darkest moment of the night. The Lord will come to you at your darkest moment of the night. Now listen, if he hasn't shown up yet, it hadn't gotten dark enough. He will come to you at your darkest moment of the night, at that time that you just think that you cannot go another step, at the time that you're ready to throw in the towel, when you feel like the whole world is against you and your thoughts become suicidal, you know, when death seems like a better alternative than what you're dealing with. Jesus will come to you in your darkest hour. If it's somebody that you've just lost, a loved one, Jesus will come to you in your darkest hour. If he has to visit you in a dream, he will come to you in your darkest hour. He will not forsake you in your darkest hour. And this is just a testament of what he did for Paul. He came to him and he encouraged him in his darkest hour. And then notice something in verse 16 here. So when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. You see, these folks where he was in Jerusalem, they had planned to kill him. They said, listen, we don't care anything about him. They said, listen, we're going to hide here in a group. And before they can even bring him back out to court again, they said, we are going to kill him on the way. We're going to take judgment into our own hands. They were going to kill him. And isn't it something that God had Paul's sister's son, his nephew, in earshot of what they were saying, of the plot that they had, and he heard it and got the message to Paul. And Paul went to the commander of the guard and said, excuse me, young man, will you see that this young man gets to the head man here? He's got some valuable information to tell them. So when he gets to the head man and gives him the information of what he's overheard, he says, oh my God, I've got to do something. So he plans a middle of the night extradition of Paul from Jerusalem to go down to Rome, over to Rome, Italy. And he sends an entourage of soldiers so that Paul is delivered safely. May I just tell you this, though? No one has the power to destroy you before the time when your life is submitted to God. Nobody has the power to destroy you before the time when your life is submitted to God. God will always plant someone to look out for your best interests. In this case, it was Paul's nephew. He will always plant somebody to look out for your best interests. God will always plant somebody. And he took that message, got it to the commander. The commander says, I've got to do something here. And then you notice in verse 23 exactly what he did. And he called for 2 centurions, saying, prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. It's interesting. There was about midnight. About midnight, he got him out of there. So Paul is escorted to Rome to see Governor Felix by an entourage of 470 men. Now that's some heavy guard. Now they intended for Paul to get there alive. They had 470 men guarding one man, Paul, to deliver him safely to the governor of Rome. And they succeeded. 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen. And when you don't understand why it is that you're going through whatever you're going through, always ask God to reveal his purpose of glory to you. Ask him to reveal his purpose of glory. See, these things are done for the glory of God. God's going to get glory out of it. Ask him to reveal his glory. If you can ever get a glimpse of the glory of God, Moses asked, Lord, show me your glory. When he saw the glory of the Lord, he was all right. He was strengthened for the journey as long as he could see, why am I going through this? Why am I enduring this? Have you ever done something and you ask yourself the question, why am I putting myself through this? Nobody even appreciates what I'm doing, and I wind up in jail, on trial, and the very people that I have helped are not the ones trying to bail me out. Have you ever wondered why is it that I can loan money to people, and then when I get in a jam, the very people that I've loaned money to can't give me a dime? I know you don't know anybody like that. I know you don't. I know you don't. But whenever you don't understand why you're going through what you're going through, ask God to reveal his purpose of glory to you. You see, Jesus had already warned Paul that he must bear witness of him also in Rome. And when God, I just want you to know that when God is working in your life, and no matter how much trouble that you're going through, you can feel like you're going through hell and high water, but you realize it's not over yet. God's not finished with me yet. I feel like this is the end of the road for me. I can't see how I'm gonna make it through this. You might be over your head in debt and can't even see how in the world can I ever get out of this. You might have stuff on your record and you wonder, how in the world can this ever be expunged? How in the world can this be forgiven? How in the world can I be vindicated from this? Listen, I came to remind you, God's not finished with you. You got your own Rome to go to. God's going to make sure, I don't care if he has to send 470 angels to guard you. You don't even understand how you can live in a bad neighborhood and you haven't been killed yet. You're under heavy guard. You may not be able to see them, but there are some angels that are there that will slice somebody's head off. Don't be worried about it. Just realize my work is not yet done. My work is not yet done. My work is not yet done. And don't let people drag you into this thing where they are judging you by a chapter of your life and they haven't read the rest of the book. Listen, don't get yourself into a tizzy over one chapter that's got some trials and tribulation and depressing stuff in it, because that's not how your story ends. May I just remind you of this? God never ever ends on a negative. He never ends on a negative. God's got glory in it. That's why he couldn't leave Jesus in the grave. The grave death is a negative. He had to resurrect him. He had to finish the story where there was a Sunday morning to be able to rejoice about how he got up. Thank God he didn't leave him in the grave. He got up so that we could get up. There's something that you got to go on and do, because you haven't gotten to the glory part yet. Don't you dare stop until you get to the glory. You go until you get to the glory. We're digging for gold. We're going for glory this time. We're going for glory. Until you get to the glory part of your story, it's not over. It's not over until you get to the glory. God becomes your defender when you can't even defend yourself. You may say, I don't even have the money to fight this thing. God becomes the defender of those who refuse to defend themselves. God's on your side right now. He's working on your behalf. God's negotiating stuff on your behalf. You'll be surprised how you'll get stuff reduced, how you'll get stuff forgiven. God is your defender. He is your defender. You can't even pay their fee for them to wipe the stuff off of your record. God has to become your defender. How he clears this up and how he restores this relationship in your own family of what you've been dealing with. God is the defender of those who refuse to defend themselves. If you will hold your peace and let the Lord fight your battle, I'm telling you, then victory will be yours. That is really a powerful truth in that. That is not weakness. I'm not talking advocating passivity if God has given you specific instructions of something that you need to do and you fail to confront it. But if God has said, trust me, Trust me, there are times that God will look over at you and says, stand ye still, Moses, and see the salvation of the Lord. Watch me. Watch what I'm going to do. Watch what I'm going to do. I know you got an army behind you and a Red Sea before you and the wilderness on one side and you got desert on the other side, and you don't know what in the world to do. But the Lord becomes the defender of those who refuse to defend himself. Moses didn't have a sword. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have an atomic bomb that he could drop. He had to depend on the Lord, and the Lord fought their battle. All night long, God was the one that fought the army behind them and then opened up a way before them. God was the one that made a way out of no way. And I'm just here to tell you that God is not finished with you. Don't you dare think that your story is done. I'm telling you, you got a story to tell, you got a passion to live, and you got a world to change. And your story is not over until you get to the glory part. Until you get to the glory part, you're going to finish well. You got to touch yourself, say, I'm going to finish well. Touch it, say it, I'm going to finish well. Say, I'm going to run my race. And I'm going to fight my fight. And I'm going to finish my course. And when you run and finish your course, that's when you get the glory. It's when you will cross that finish line. And this is not just for the first one who gets across. This is for everyone who makes it across, and you will hear the Master say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. I'm just here to tell you that the best part, God always saves for last. He knows how to allow it to end on a high note. There's a glory part. Listen, if things are down in your life right now, hold on. You just hold on, because you're on your way to glory. God will deliver you. He will deliver you from the very thing that's been tormenting your life. I hope you got something out of the word of the Lord. I really do. There might be something that you need to let God defend in your life. Let God be God. Let God be God. Don't let anger consume you and destroy you. I pray that the word of the Lord has been meaningful to you wherever you are, whatever part of the world that you're joining us from. We thank you. We bless you, and I pray that there has been some part of the word of the Lord that has been life to you, and that you have heard a confirming word of something that God may have been dealing with you in your own heart about. And I want you to expect with all expectancy toward God that He will do exceedingly, abundantly, and above all that you can ask or think. And it is according to the power that works right on the inside of you. There is something working in you. There's something that's working in you.
Thank you for watching Power for Living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner. Join us again next time for Power for Living, where revelation is power. Power for living.